rejected and alone at midnight, until a 400-year-old vampire lord took her into his castle. The storm had been building for 3 days, and tonight it finally hit the small village of Millbrook with full force. Lightning cut through the black sky like silver knives, lighting up the scared faces of people gathered in the old town hall. The wooden building creaked and groaned from the strong wind and rain. But inside, something far worse than the weather was about to happen. Ava Rowan stood in the center of the crowd, her reddish-brown hair stuck to her pale face from the rain that had soaked through her thin shawl. Her green eyes looked around the room, searching for a single friendly face among all the angry stares. She found none. Even Mrs. Henderson, who used to give her fresh bread when she was a child, now looked at her with disgust and fear. "She brings darkness wherever she goes," whispered someone from the crowd. "Just like her mother did," added another voice, filled with meanness. Ava's heart pounded against her chest. She had known this day might come, but she had hoped, prayed that Owen would stand by her, that her fiancé of 2 years would remember the love they once shared. But as she looked at him now, standing stiff beside Elder Matthews, she saw nothing but cold rejection in his blue eyes. Owen Blackwell had once been the most popular man in Millbrook. Tall, blonde, and strong from years of working his family's farm. He could have chosen any girl in the village. For 2 wonderful years, Ava had believed she was the lucky one. She had believed in their future together, in the small house they would build at the edge of town, in the children they would raise. How foolish she had been. "Owen," she whispered, taking a shaking step toward him. "Please tell them I'm not what they think I am." Elder Matthews, a thin man with silver hair and cold gray eyes, raised his hand for silence. The murmuring crowd fell quiet, except for the storm raging outside. "Ava Rowan, you stand accused of practicing the dark arts, of carrying the same cursed blood that flowed through your mother's veins." "That's not true. My mother was a healer, nothing more. She helped people." "She communed with shadows. She spoke to things that should not be spoken to. And when the fever took half our children that winter, you were the only one whose daughter remained untouched. Explain that, witch." The word hit Ava like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, her hand reaching out automatically toward Owen. Surely he would defend her now. Surely he would remember how she had nursed him back to health when he fell from his horse last spring, how she had spent countless nights by his bedside praying for his recovery. But Owen stepped away from her outstretched hand as if it were poisoned. "I cannot marry a woman touched by darkness," he said, his voice steady but his eyes refusing to meet hers. "I'm sorry, Ava, but our engagement is over." The words shattered something deep inside her chest. Ava felt her knees buckle, but she forced herself to remain standing. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her fall, not yet. "You're making a mistake," she said, virtually inaudible. "All of you. I've never hurt anyone. I've only ever tried to help." "Help," Elder Matthews laughed bitterly. "Like you helped young Timothy when he broke his arm? The bone healed in 3 days when it should have taken weeks. Like you helped the widow Carson's crops grow during the drought? Her fields were the only ones that didn't wither." "Those are good things," Ava cried out. "I don't understand why you're punishing me for—" "Because it's not natural," Owen finally exploded, his composure cracking. "Nothing about you is natural, Ava. I see the way animals follow you around like they're under some kind of spell. I see how plants seem to grow taller when you're near them. I've watched you heal cuts on your hands that should have left scars. It's not normal, and I won't spend my life wondering what else you're capable of." Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. In the brief silence that followed, Elder Matthews spoke again. "By the authority granted to me by this village and by God himself, I hereby banish you from Millbrook, Ava Rowan. You have until dawn to be gone from our lands, never to return." "But the storm," Ava gasped. "You can't send me out in this weather. I'll die out there." "Then perhaps that is God's will." The crowd began to move, forming a circle around her, pushing her toward the door. Ava looked desperately one last time at Owen, hoping against hope that he would change his mind, that he would remember the man she thought he was. Instead, he turned his back on her completely. The heavy wooden door flew open and the storm's fury rushed into the hall like a living thing. A hand shoved Ava forward into the screaming wind and driving rain. She heard the door slam shut behind her, followed by the heavy thud of the bolt sliding into place. She was alone. The rain was merciless, soaking through her clothes in seconds and chilling her to the bone. The wind howled like a banshee, nearly knocking her off her feet with each gust. Lightning lit up the muddy streets in stark, terrifying detail before plunging everything back into complete darkness. Ava ran blindly through the village, past the houses where warm lights glowed in windows, past the lives she would never be part of again. Her feet slipped and slid in the mud, and twice she fell, scraping her hands and knees on the rough stones. But she kept running, driven by some desperate instinct to get as far away as possible from the hatred she had left behind. By the time she reached the edge of the village, her strength was nearly gone. The cursed forest loomed before her like a wall of living shadow, its ancient trees twisting and moving in the storm. Local legends spoke of things that lived in those woods, things that fed on human flesh and blood, things that should not exist in the modern world. But as Ava collapsed to her knees in the mud, sobbing with exhaustion and heartbreak, she realized she no longer cared what might be waiting for her in the darkness. Anything would be better than the cruelty she had just endured. She was wrong. From the deepest shadows between the trees, something was watching her, something that had been waiting for this moment longer than she could possibly imagine. And as her sobs echoed through the storm-torn night, a pair of crimson eyes began to glow in the darkness, and a figure stepped forward from the depths of the cursed forest. "Come with me, or die here. The choice is yours." Through her tears and a driving rain, Ava looked up at the figure emerging from the shadows. He was tall, impossibly tall, with dark hair that seemed to absorb the lightning's glow rather than reflect it. His skin was pale as moonlight, and those crimson eyes burned like twin embers in the darkness. He wore a long black coat that billowed around him despite the howling wind, as if the storm itself bent to his will. Who are you?" Ava whispered, her voice barely audible over the thunder. "I am Lord Lucien Drager, and you, dear child, are dying." As if to prove his point, another violent shiver racked Ava's body. Her lips had turned blue, and she could no longer feel her fingers. The cold was seeping into her bones, promising a slow and miserable death. "I don't understand," she stammered. "Why would you help me?" Lucien tilted his head, studying her with those unsettling eyes. "Perhaps I have my reasons. Perhaps I simply dislike waste." He extended a gloved hand toward her. "The choice remains yours, Ava Rowan. Come with me willingly, or let the storm claim you." The use of her name sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "How do you know who I am?" A ghost of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I know many things." Lightning crashed again, and in that brilliant flash, Ava saw something that made her blood freeze. Behind Lucien, partially hidden in the shadows, stood an enormous black carriage. The horses that pulled it were unlike any she had ever seen. Their eyes glowed with the same crimson light as their masters, and their breath came out in puffs of smoke despite the warm summer storm. She should run. Every instinct screamed at her to flee from this unnatural man and his impossible carriage. But where could she go? The village had cast her out, and the forest was full of dangers she couldn't even name. And there was something else, something in Lucian's voice that suggested he had been waiting for her, that this meeting was not mere chance. "I'll come with you," she whispered. Lucian nodded once, as if he had expected no other answer. He reached down and lifted her effortlessly, as if she weighed nothing at all. His strength was inhuman, and his body was cold, colder than the storm, colder than the grave. But his coat was dry and warm, and for the first time in hours, Ava felt safe. The carriage ride passed in a blur of exhaustion and shock. Ava drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of the horse's hooves drumming against cobblestones that shouldn't exist in the middle of a forest. When she finally awoke fully, they were climbing a winding mountain path, and ahead of them loomed a massive castle that seemed to have been carved from the very stone of the mountainside. "Welcome to Castle Drager," Lucian said softly. "Your new home." The castle was a Gothic masterpiece of towering spires and flying buttresses. Its windows were dark, except for a few that glowed with flickering candlelight. Gargoyles perched on every corner, their stone faces twisted into expressions of eternal pain. As they passed through the main gate, Ava could swear she heard the sound of chains rattling in the wind. Inside, the castle was even more magnificent and terrifying than its exterior suggested. The entrance hall stretched up into shadows so deep they seemed solid, supported by massive stone columns carved with symbols Ava didn't recognize. Tapestries hung from the walls, their colors still vivid despite their obvious age, depicting scenes of battles between humans and creatures with fangs and claws. But it was the portraits that truly unnerved her. Dozens of them lined the walls, all showing the same man at different periods throughout history. Some showed him in medieval armor, others in Renaissance finery, still others in more modern dress. But the face was always the same, always Lucian's face, always with those burning crimson eyes. "Impossible," Ava breathed. "Many things are impossible, my dear, until they are not." Silent figures appeared from the shadows to take Lucian's coat and gloves. They moved with fluid grace, but their faces were pale as parchment, and their eyes held no warmth. They looked at Ava with curiosity, but said nothing, communicating with their master through glances and subtle gestures. "My staff," Lucian explained. "They have served my family for generations. They do not speak to outsiders, but they will see to your every need." One of the pale servants, a woman who might have been beautiful once before something had drained the life from her features, gestured for Ava to follow. Lucian nodded his approval. "Rest now," he told Ava. "We will speak again when you have recovered from your ordeal." The servant led Ava through corridors lined with more impossible portraits and up a sweeping staircase that seemed to spiral into infinity. The air was thick with the scent of old roses and something else, something metallic that made Ava's stomach clench with uneasiness. Her chamber was more luxurious than anything she had ever seen. A four-poster bed dominated the room, its burgundy curtains embroidered with silver thread that caught the firelight. A fire crackled merrily in the massive stone fireplace, and fresh clothes had been laid out on a nearby chair, a dress of deep blue silk that looked as if it had been made specifically for her. The silent servant gestured toward a basin of warm water and fresh towels, then glided from the room without a sound. Ava found herself alone for the first time since her ordeal had begun. As she washed and changed into the beautiful dress, her mind raced with questions. Who was Lucian Drager? How had he known her name? Why had he saved her? And most disturbing of all, how had he managed to look exactly the same in portraits spanning hundreds of years? She was examining a particularly old painting near the window, one that showed Lucian standing beside a woman who looked remarkably like herself, when she heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Heavy, measured footsteps that stopped directly outside her door. "Sleep well, Ava Rowan," came Lucian's voice through the heavy wood. "Tomorrow we shall discuss the price of my hospitality." As his footsteps faded away, Ava sank onto the bed, her heart hammering. She was a guest here, that much was clear. The door had no lock on the inside, and no one had threatened her or chained her to the wall, but she was beginning to understand that she might be in more danger than she had ever been in the storm. Outside her window, she could see the forest stretching endlessly into the night, and somewhere in that darkness, the village of Millbrook slept peacefully, never knowing that one of their own now resided in the castle of legends, the castle that parents used to frighten their children into obedience, the castle of the vampire lord. Ava slept fitfully, haunted by dreams of crimson eyes and storm-lashed villages. When she awoke, pale morning light filtered through heavy curtains, though it seemed dimmer than it should be, as if the castle itself swallowed the sunshine. A breakfast tray sat on the small table beside her. Fresh bread, honey, fruit, and tea that still steamed, despite the fact that she had heard no one enter. She dressed quickly in the blue silk gown, which fit her perfectly, unnervingly so. As she finished the last of her tea, a soft knock came at her door. "Enter," she called, expecting one of the silent servants. Instead, Lucian himself stepped into the room. In the daylight, he appeared even more otherworldly. His pale skin seemed to have an almost glowing quality, and those crimson eyes held depths that spoke of centuries rather than decades. He wore an elegant black suit that belonged to no fashion she recognized, though it was undeniably beautiful. "I trust you slept well," he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "As well as could be expected," Ava replied carefully. "Thank you for your hospitality, Lord Dragger, but I think it's time I moved on. I don't want to impose." "Moved on?" Lucian's laugh was soft, but held no warmth. "And where exactly would you go, my dear? Back to your loving village?" The words hit their mark. Ava's face fell as the reality of her situation crashed over her again. She had no home, no family, no friends. Even if she could survive the journey, what village would take in a woman branded as a witch? "You have nowhere to go," Lucian continued, his voice gentle but relentless. "Do you know why the villagers cast you out so readily, Ava?" She shook her head, though she dreaded the answer. "Because they have always known what you are. Your mother was not merely a healer, as you believed. She was something far more rare and valuable. And they tolerated her presence only because she was useful to them. When she died, they watched you, waiting to see if you would develop the same gifts." "What gifts?" Ava whispered, though she already knew part of the answer. "The ability to heal with a touch, to make plants grow with your presence, to sense things others cannot." His eyes seemed to glow brighter. "Tell me, Ava, have you ever wondered why animals trust you so completely? Why children stop crying when you hold them? Why wounds heal faster under your care?" Each word was like a piece of a puzzle clicking into place. All her life she had noticed these things, but had dismissed them as coincidence or imagination. Now seeing the truth reflected in Lucian's ancient eyes, she could no longer deny what she was. "They knew," she said, her voice hollow. "The villagers knew I was different."
"They knew and they used you," Lucian confirmed. "How many times did they bring their sick children to you in secret? How many crops did you save with your touch? They benefited from your gifts while publicly condemning you for having them. And when the fear became stronger than their greed, they threw you away like garbage." Tears burned in Ava's eyes. "Owen knew too. That's why he could reject me so easily." "Owen Blackwell is a coward and a fool," Lucian said with contempt. "He saw your power and feared it because he could never possess it himself. Men like him destroy what they cannot control." Ava sank into the chair by the window, overwhelmed by the weight of this revelation. Everything she had believed about her life, about the people she had trusted, crumbled to dust. "I offer you something they never could," Lucian said, his voice taking on a hypnotic quality. "Protection, acceptance, a place where your gifts will be valued rather than feared." What do you want in return? Ava asked, because she was learning that nothing came without a price. Lucien smiled, and for the first time it seemed genuine. Clever girl. I want your loyalty, Ava, your trust. Pledge yourself to me, and I will ensure you never suffer betrayal again. You will never age, never sicken, never die. The castle will be your sanctuary, and I will be your guardian. The offer was tempting, more than tempting, but something in his words sent a chill through her. Never age, never die. That's impossible, is it? Lucien moved to one of the portraits on the wall, the one showing him in medieval armor. I have lived for 400 years, Ava. Death is not the inevitable fate you believe it to be. Her blood turned to ice. You're a vampire. Yes, he finished calmly. Does that frighten you? Ava stared at him, her mind reeling. Everything made sense now. His impossible strength, his cold skin, the way shadows seemed to bend around him. And yet, looking at him now, she felt no immediate terror. If he had wanted to hurt her, he could have done so already. Should it frighten me? She asked quietly. Something shifted in Lucien's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or approval. Most humans would be screaming by now. I'm not most humans, apparently. No, he agreed, studying her with newfound interest. You are not. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Ava spoke. If I agree to this bargain, what exactly would my life be like? You would be my companion, Lucien said. Free to explore the castle and its grounds, to read from my library, to pursue whatever interest you choose. You would want for nothing. But I could never leave. He wasn't want you to. His voice was soft, almost sad. The world beyond these walls has shown you nothing but cruelty. Here you would be treasured. Ava looked out the window at the forest below, thinking of the village that had cast her out, of Owen's betrayal, of a lifetime of hiding what she was. Then she looked back at Lucien, this impossible man who offered her everything she had never dared to dream of. I accept, she said quietly. Lucien's eyes flashed with something that might have been relief. Then give me your hand. When she placed her palm in his skin was cold as marble, but his touch was gentle. I, Ava Rowan, pledge my loyalty to Lord Lucien Drager, she heard herself say, though she couldn't remember him telling her the words. And I pledge to protect you from all harm. Welcome home, Ava. As night fell, they sat together in his private study, surrounded by books that looked older than countries. By candlelight, Lucien seemed less imposing, more human. He spoke of literature and philosophy, of places he had traveled and wonders he had seen. And slowly Eva began to see past the monsters she had expected to find. Perhaps the real monsters were the ones she had left behind in Millbrook. Perhaps she was exactly where she belonged. 3 days had passed since Ava made her bargain with Lucien, and the castle had begun to feel less like a prison and more like a labyrinth of secrets waiting to be discovered. Lucien disappeared during the daylight hours. She suspected he slept somewhere deep within the castle's bowels, leaving her free to explore the seemingly endless corridors and chambers. The castle was larger than she had imagined, with passages that seemed to twist back on themselves and stairs that led to doors that opened onto nothing but empty air. She had learned to mark her path with small objects from her room, though sometimes she returned to find them moved to different locations entirely. It was on the 4th morning that she discovered the locked wing. She had been following a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors when she noticed that one section of the hallway seemed darker than the rest. The portraits here were covered with dust sheets, and the air carried a strange metallic scent that reminded her unpleasantly of the village butcher's shop. At the end of this forgotten corridor stood a heavy oak door bound with iron. Unlike every other door in the castle, this one bore a massive lock, its metal black with age. When she pressed her ear against the wood, she could hear nothing, a silence so complete it seemed to push back against her. But what she found on the floor made her blood run cold. Dark stains had seeped under the door and dried into the stone floor, stains that looked suspiciously like old blood. More stains decorated the walls around the doorframe, as if something had been dragged through this corridor, something that had fought back. You should not be here. Ava spun around to find one of the pale servants standing behind her, a young man with hollow eyes and skin like parchment. She had not heard him approach, and his sudden appearance made her heart race. I was just exploring, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Not here, the servant interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. Never here. The master forbids it. Before Ava could ask why, The servant turned and glided away, moving with that same unnatural grace they all possessed. She followed him, but when she turned the corner, he had vanished completely. The corridor stretched empty before her, as if he had never existed at all. That afternoon, while reading in the library, Ava overheard two servants whispering in a language she didn't know. But one phrase came through clearly, spoken in accented English: the bride of Draeger. Her blood chilled. She had heard that phrase before, years ago, when she was still a child. Old women in the village used to tell stories about the bride of Draeger, a woman who had supposedly been chosen by the vampire lords centuries ago, only to meet a terrible fate. The details were always vague, changing with each telling, but the ending was always the same. The bride had died horribly, and her spirit still wandered the castle halls. She had dismissed it as folklore, the kind of ghost story adults told to frighten children into behaving. Now standing in the very castle those stories described, she wondered if there might be more truth to the tales than she had ever imagined. That evening, when Lucien joined her for dinner in the Great Hall, she decided to probe for answers. "I've been exploring the castle," she said carefully, watching his face for any reaction. "It's magnificent, though some areas seem older than others." "The castle has stood for 800 years, Lucien replied, cutting his meat with precise movements. "Different wings were built in different eras. Some sections are best left undisturbed." "Like the locked wing on the third floor?" Lucien's knife paused midway to his mouth. When he looked at her, his crimson eyes held a warning that made her stomach clench. "You were told not to go there." "I was curious." "Curiosity can be dangerous in a place like this," he said, his voice soft but filled with unmistakable menace. "There are rooms in this castle that contain things you are not ready to see, perhaps things you will never be ready to see. I ask that you respect my wishes in this matter." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Ava nodded quickly, not trusting her voice to remain steady. "Good," he said, his tone returning to normal. "Now tell me about the book you were reading today. Dante, was it not?" The rest of the dinner passed pleasantly enough, but Ava couldn't shake the feeling that she had glimpsed something dark lurking beneath Lucien's civilized exterior, and the more she thought about it, the more the portrait she had seen, the one showing Lucien with a woman that looked like her, took on sinister implications.
Meanwhile, in the village of Millbrook, unease was growing like a cancer. Elder Matthew stood before a gathering of the town's most devout men, his face grave in the flickering candlelight of the church basement. "It has been 4 days, he announced, 4 days since we cast out the witch, and still she has not returned." "Maybe she died in the storm," suggested Thomas Hartwell, though his voice lacked conviction. "Or maybe," said Owen Blackwell, his jaw tight with barely controlled fury, "she found shelter in the one place we all know she shouldn't have." A collective shiver ran through the assembled men. They all knew the stories. They all knew what lived in the castle on the mountain. "If the vampire has claimed her," Elder Matthew said gravely, "then our village is in grave danger. He will use her gifts, twist them to serve his dark purposes. We cannot allow this to stand." "What are you suggesting?" asked Miller Gordon, a stout man whose hand shook as he spoke. Elder Matthews pulled back a cloth to reveal an array of weapons: silver blades, wooden stakes, vials of holy water. "I'm suggesting we do what our ancestors should have done centuries ago. We end this threat once and for all." Owen's eyes gleamed with savage satisfaction. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow night. When the moon is dark and God's light shines brightest, we will storm the castle, destroy the vampire, and save Ava's soul, if it can still be saved." The men murmured their agreement, fear and righteousness burning in their eyes. None of them noticed the shadow that moved past the basement window, or the way the candles flickered as if touched by an unnatural wind. In the castle, Ava felt a sudden chill run down her spine, though she couldn't say why. Somewhere in the darkness, she heard the faint sound of laughter, cold, bitter, and utterly without humor. The shadows were gathering, and she was beginning to understand that her bargain with Lucien might have consequences she had never imagined. The second storm arrived 3 days later, more violent than the one that had driven Ava from Millbrook. This time, however, she watched it from the safety of Lucien's castle, standing at the great windows of the library as lightning split the sky and thunder shook the ancient stones. But there was something different about this storm, something unnatural. The lightning was tinged with green, and the wind carried voices that spoke in languages long forgotten. "The forest is angry," Lucien said softly from behind her. She hadn't heard him enter, but she was growing accustomed to his silent movements. "Angry about what?" Ava asked, not turning from the window. "About what approaches." His voice was grim. "This storm will last for days. Nothing will be able to travel these mountain passes until it subsides." As if summoned by his words, a bolt of lightning struck the castle's highest tower, sending green sparks cascading down the walls like supernatural rain. The impact was so powerful it shook the entire structure, and several ancient books tumbled from their shelves. "We are trapped here together," Lucien observed, moving to stand beside her at the window. "Time for what?" He was quiet for so long that Ava began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "Time for truth." Over the next 3 days, as the supernatural storm raged outside, Lucien began to reveal fragments of his past like pieces of a shattered mirror. They would sit by the fire in his private chambers, sharing wine that tasted of distant vineyards and lost years, and he would speak of things he had never told another soul. "I was not always what I am now," he began on the first night, staring into the flames. "Once, I was merely a man. A foolish man who believed in love and honor and all the pretty lies humans tell themselves." Ava curled deeper into the velvet chair, sensing that whatever he was about to tell her would change everything between them. "Her name was Evangelina," he continued, his voice soft with memory and pain. "She had hair like spun gold and eyes the color of summer sky. When I looked at her," he paused, glancing at Ava with an expression she couldn't quite read. "When I looked at her, I saw my future, my salvation." The resemblance wasn't lost on Ava. She had seen it in the portraits, in the way Lucien sometimes looked at her when she thought she wasn't watching. What happened to her? "She betrayed me." The words came out like shards of glass. "I gave her everything, my heart, my trust, my very soul. I would have made her my wife, my queen. Instead, she chose to destroy me." On the second night, as rain lashed against the windows with inhuman fury, Lucien told her about the transformation. "Evangelina was not acting alone," he said, his hands gripping his wine goblet so tightly that Ava feared it might shatter. "She was working with the church, with men who saw my family's power as a threat to their own. They came for us on our wedding night, armed with holy water and silver, blessed by corrupt priests." "They killed your family." "They tried." Lucien's eyes blazed crimson in the firelight. "But something else found me first in the ruins of my burning home. Something ancient and hungry. It offered me a choice: die with my family or live forever with the power to take revenge." "You chose revenge." "I chose survival," he corrected. "The revenge came later." The third night brought the worst of the storm. The castle shook continuously under the assault of wind and lightning, and in the distance they could hear trees falling like thunder. It was then that Lucien told her about the massacre. "I returned to them 1 year later," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "to Evangelina, to the priests, to every soul who had participated in my family's destruction. I gave them the same mercy they had shown my loved ones." "You killed them all." "I did worse than that." Lucien's smile was terrible to behold. "I turned some of them, made them like me, but without the choice I had been given. I let them experience eternity as monsters, knowing what they had become, powerless to change it." Ava felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. "And Evangelina?" "I saved her for last." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I wanted her to watch as I destroyed everything she held dear. I wanted her to understand the depths of her betrayal. When I finally came for her, she begged. She wept. She swore she had loved me all along." "Did you believe her?" "It didn't matter. Love built on lies is no love at all."
He looked directly at Ava then, and she saw centuries of pain in his ancient eyes. I made her what I am, Ava, but I took away her ability to feed. She existed in eternal hunger, forever beautiful, forever dying, unable to end her torment. The room fell silent except for the storm's fury. Ava stared at this man, this creature, who had just confessed to acts of such terrible revenge that they defied comprehension. She should be horrified. She should be planning her escape. Instead, she found herself moving closer to him. Where is she now? Ava asked softly. Gone, Lucian replied. After 200 years of suffering, she finally found a way to end her existence. I did not stop her. Do you regret it? What you did to her? Lucian considered this for a long moment. I regret loving her in the first place. I regret believing she was capable of the same depth of feeling I possessed. As for her Tate, she shrugged. She chose her path. I merely ensured she walked it to its conclusion. That night, as the storm began to subside, Ava lay awake thinking about everything Lucian had revealed. The man she was growing to care for, and she could no longer deny that she was caring for him, was capable of cruelties beyond imagination. He had tortured someone he loved for centuries, simply because she had betrayed him. Yet when she looked at him, she didn't see a monster. She saw someone who had been broken so completely that he had remade himself into something harder, colder, less vulnerable, someone who had loved so deeply that the betrayal had nearly destroyed him. She understood perhaps better than anyone what it felt like to be cast aside by those who should have protected her. The difference was that Lucian had been given the power to make them pay for their cruelty. As she finally drifted off to sleep, one thought echoed in her mind. The resemblance between herself and Evangelina was not coincidence. Lucian had been watching her, waiting for her, for reasons that went far deeper than mere chance. The question was, had he saved her from the storm, or was she simply walking into a trap 400 years in the making?
Outside, the supernatural storm finally began to calm. But Ava sensed that far greater tempests were approaching. And at the center of them all would be her choice. Trust the vampire, who had shown her more kindness than any human ever had, or fear the monster he had admitted to being. In her dreams, she saw golden hair and summer blue eyes, and heard the echo of betrayal that had shaped both their destinies. The attack came at sunset on the fourth day, just as the supernatural storm finally broke. Ava was in the library reading by candlelight when she heard the sound that chilled her blood. The voices of men raised in righteous fury echoing across the mountainside. The villagers, she whispered, dropping her book. Lucian appeared beside her so quickly she didn't see him move. His face was carved from stone, but his eyes blazed with an inner fire that spoke of barely controlled rage. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. But Ava followed him anyway, drawn by a terrible fascination to see how this confrontation would unfold. They made their way to the castle's main hall, where massive windows overlooked the courtyard. Below them, a mob of perhaps 20 men had gathered, their torches casting dancing shadows against the ancient stone walls. Elder Matthews stood at their head, clutching a silver crucifix that glinted in the firelight. Beside him, Owen Blackwell held a sword that looked as if it had been blessed by every priest in the county. The other men carried an assortment of weapons: wooden stakes, silver blades, vials of what could only be holy water. "Lord Drager," Elder Matthews called out, his voice echoing off the castle walls. "We know you're in there, demon. We've come for the girl." Lucian stepped onto the great balcony that overlooked the courtyard, and Ava gasped. He seemed to have grown larger, more imposing, shadows rising around him like living things. When he spoke, his voice carried across the night with supernatural force. "You are not welcome here, mortals. Leave now while you still can." "Release Ava Rowan," Owen shouted, raising his blessed sword. "Return her to us, monster, or face the wrath of God himself." Lucian's laughter was like winter wind through cemetery stones.
The girl chose to stay. Perhaps you should ask yourself why she preferred the company of a monster to the mercy of her own people. You've stolen her soul, Elder Matthews accused, corrupted her with your dark magic. She's not responsible for her actions. Is that what you tell yourselves? Lucien's voice dropped to a silky whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the courtyard. That she had no choice in the matter? How convenient for your consciences. From her hiding place behind the stone balustrade, Ava watched Owen's face contort with rage and something else, something that looked suspiciously like wounded pride. She was mine, Owen bellowed. We were to be married. You had no right to take her. Take her? Lucien's eyes began to glow crimson. I saved her from freezing to death in a storm you created. I offered her sanctuary when you cast her out like garbage. If anyone took Ava, it was you. You took away her home, her family, her future. I merely offered her a new one. Lies! Elder Matthews raised his crucifix higher. We cast out a witch, a servant of darkness. It was God's will. God's will. Lucien's voice turned deadly soft. Then let God protect you from mine. What happened next would haunt Ava's dreams for years to come. Lucien raised his hand, and 3 of the villagers, men she had known since childhood, simply crumbled to ash where they stood. Their screams echoed for only a moment before the wind scattered their remains across the courtyard. The remaining men fell back in terror, but Elder Matthews stood firm, clutching his crucifix like a shield. The power of Christ compels you, he shouted, advancing toward the castle entrance. Christ is not here tonight, Lucien replied coldly, only judgment. But as he prepared to descend upon the remaining attackers, Owen did something that surprised everyone. Instead of fleeing with the others, he pulled a dagger from his belt, a blade that glowed with an eerie white light, and hurled it with desperate accuracy. The weapon struck Lucien in the shoulder, and the vampire lord screamed, a sound of such agony that it seemed to crack the very stones of the castle. He staggered backward, dark blood flowing from the wound, and Ava saw smoke rising from his flesh where the blade had touched. A sacred blade, Elder Matthews cried in triumph, forged by the first priests who drove your kind from these lands. Let's see how long you last with holy steel in your veins. But Owen wasn't celebrating. As Lucien fell to one knee, weakened by the sacred weapon's poison, Owen looked up at the balcony where Ava stood watching in horror. Come down here, Ava, he commanded. Come down now while he's weak. This is your chance to escape. Ava stared at him, this man she had once loved, who was now demanding she abandon someone who had shown her more kindness than Owen ever had. She saw the truth written clearly on his face. He didn't want to save her. He wanted to possess her. The difference between love and ownership had never been clearer. No, she said quietly. What? Owen's face twisted with rage. I'm trying to save you from what? Ava called down. From someone who values my gifts instead of fearing them? From someone who offers me partnership instead of servitude? No, Owen, I won't come with you. You're bewitched, corrupted. When we kill this monster, you'll see reason. But even as he spoke, the other villagers were backing away, terrified by what they had witnessed. Elder Matthews grabbed Owen's arm. We need to retreat, he hissed. Gather more men, more weapons. We'll return when we're better prepared. I'm not leaving without her. Owen fought against the elder's grip, his eyes wild with possessive fury. We'll get her back, Matthews promised, but not tonight. Tonight we retreat. Reluctantly, Owen allowed himself to be dragged away, but not before shooting one final look of pure hatred at the balcony where Ava stood. This isn't over, he shouted. I'll be back. Ava, I'll save you from yourself if I have to. As the mob retreated into the forest, Ava ran to Lucien's side. He was still kneeling, one hand pressed against the wound where sacred steel continued to burn his immortal flesh. We need to get that blade out, Ava said. although she had no idea how to safely remove a weapon that was clearly killing him. "It will heal," Lucien gasped, although his face was pale with pain. "The sacred metal fights against my nature." Ava helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as they made their way back into the castle. As she guided him towards his chambers, she realized that any doubt about where her loyalties lay had just been permanently settled. Owen had shown his true face tonight, not the face of a concerned lover, but of a man who saw her as property to be reclaimed. Lucien, despite being a monster capable of turning men to ash with a thought, had never once tried to control her choices. The irony wasn't lost on her. The vampire had given her more freedom than the humans ever had. "Why did you stay?" he asked, as she began to carefully examine his wound. "Because," Ava said, "because you were right about something. The real monsters are the ones I left behind in Millbrook." As she worked to help heal the man who had revealed himself to be both savior and destroyer, Ava knew that Owen would return, and when he did, she would be ready to make her final choice between the world that had cast her out and the darkness that had claimed her as its own. For 3 days, Lucien lay weakened by the sacred blade's poison. The wound refused to heal properly, the blessed steel having left something corrupt in his immortal flesh that fought against his vampire nature. Ava tended to him with the devotion that surprised them both, using her healing gifts to ease his pain while carefully avoiding the cursed wound itself. It was during those quiet hours of recovery that she came to understand the true depth of her feelings for him. This was no longer about gratitude or sanctuary. What she felt for Lucien was deeper, more dangerous, a connection that transcended the boundaries between human and monster. "You should leave," he told her on the second night, his voice weak but insistent. "While I'm unable to protect you properly, find a way to escape before they return."
"And go where?" Ava asked, dabbing cooling herbs on his fevered brow. "Back to a world that sees my gifts as curses? Back to people who would rather see me dead than different? You could find others like yourself. There are places." "I don't want to find others like myself," Ava interrupted. "I want to stay here with you." Something shifted in Lucien's crimson eyes. Surprise, hope, perhaps even love. But before he could respond, a tremendous crash echoed through the castle, followed by the sound of shattering stone. They had returned. From the window, Ava could see that Owen had brought an army this time, at least 50 men, many of them priests and holy warriors from neighboring villages. But it wasn't the numbers that terrified her, it was what they carried. Ancient relics gleamed in their hands, crosses that blazed with holy light, chalices filled with what could only be blessed blood, and at their center, a massive golden artifact that hurt to look at directly. Whatever it was, it radiated power that made the very air around it shimmer. "The chalice of Saint Erasmus," Lucien breathed, struggling to sit up despite his weakness. "I haven't seen that relic in 300 years. What does it do?" "It can destroy this entire castle and everything in it." His face was grim. "Every stone of this place would be reduced to blessed ash. There would be no escape." Elder Matthews's voice boomed across the courtyard, amplified by whatever power he now wielded. "Lord Draeger, we offer you one final chance. Release the girl and accept holy absolution. Face destruction with dignity." "They're not here to save me," Ava realized with crystal clarity. "They're here to destroy us both." Lucien nodded grimly. "They cannot allow you to live knowing what you've seen, what you've chosen. You're evidence of their failure, their cruelty. Better to kill you than let you exist as proof of their sins." The realization should have filled her with despair. Instead, it filled her with rage. These men,
These supposed servants of God were willing to murder her to preserve their own righteousness. Owen was willing to see her dead rather than free. "How do we stop them?" she asked. "We don't," Lucian said sadly. "I'm too weak to fight them all and that chalice. Even at full strength, I couldn't stand against its power." But Ava was already moving, her mind racing with desperate possibilities. "What if they didn't know about your condition? What if they thought you were still at full strength?" "What are you suggesting?" "A trap," she said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "Let me go down to them. Let me pretend to be their rescued victim. I can lead them inside, make them think they've won. Then you can strike when they're vulnerable." "Absolutely not," Lucian said, trying to rise from the bed. "I won't let you risk—" "It's not your choice," Ava interrupted, and for the first time she felt the full weight of her own power. "This is my decision, my life, my choice." She was already moving toward the door when Lucian's voice stopped her. "Ava," his voice was soft, vulnerable. "If this goes wrong—" "It won't," she said firmly. "Trust me." 20 minutes later, Ava stumbled out of the castle's main entrance, her dress torn, her hair disheveled, tears streaming down her face. The performance was flawless. She looked exactly like a woman who had just escaped from a monster's lair. "Ava!" Owen rushed toward her, his face bright with triumph. "Thank God! We thought— Are you hurt? What did he do to you?" "He's weak," she gasped, allowing Owen to pull her into his arms. "The blade, it poisoned him somehow. He can barely stand." Elder Matthew stepped forward, the chalice gleaming in his hands. "Where is he now?" "His chambers," she whispered. "Third floor, eastern wing. He's alone, defenseless." She looked up at Owen with what she hoped looked like desperate gratitude. "You came back for me?" "Of course I did," Owen said, though there was something cold in his eyes. "You're mine, Ava. I never give up what's mine." The words confirmed everything she had suspected about his true nature, but she smiled and nodded, playing her part perfectly. "Take us to him," Elder Matthews commanded. Ava led them through the castle's corridors, her heart pounding with anticipation. Behind her, 50 armed men followed, confident in their righteousness and their superior numbers. They never noticed how the shadows seemed to move independently of their torches, or how the temperature dropped with each step they took. When they reached Lucian's chambers, Ava stepped aside and pointed to the door. "He's in there," she whispered. Elder Matthews raised the chalice, its holy light blazing brighter. "Stand back, child. Let God's work be done." The door burst open, and the men poured into the room, weapons raised, expecting to find a weakened vampire cowering in his bed. Instead, they found Lucian standing at the center of the chamber, fully healed, his eyes blazing like stars. The sacred wound was gone, and around him, the very air crackled with ancient power. "Thank you, my dear," he said to Ava, with his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "Your healing touch was exactly what I needed." The trap was sprung. What followed was not a battle. It was an annihilation. Lucian moved like liquid shadow, faster than the eye could follow. The chalice's power meant nothing when its wielder was ash before he could use it. Weapons blessed by a dozen priests were useless against a vampire who had learned to harness the very darkness itself. In less than 5 minutes, 49 men lay dead in the chamber. Only Owen remained, cowering in the corner, his sword forgotten on the floor. "Please," he whimpered, looking not at Lucian, but at Ava. "Please, you can't let him kill me. We were engaged. You loved me once." Lucian turned to Ava, his expression unreadable.
His fate is yours to decide. I offer you his life or his death. Choose. Ava looked down at Owen, this man who had claimed to love her while betraying her at every turn. This man who would have seen her burned as a witch to preserve his own reputation. This man who had just led an army to destroy the only place where she had ever been truly valued. I love the man I thought you were, she said quietly, but that man never existed, did he? Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Owen alone with the monster he had helped create. His screams echoed through the castle for a very long time. When silence finally fell, Ava found Luthien waiting for her in the library, staring into the fire as if he could see the future in the flames. "It's over," he said simply. "Yes, it is." The last bridge to her human life had been burned away, and she discovered that she felt nothing but relief. The castle fell silent in the aftermath of the massacre, its ancient stones seeming to exhale with relief as the last echoes of violence faded away. Ava walked through the corridors that had witnessed centuries of similar conflicts, her footsteps soft on stones that had been baptized in the blood of those who had sought to destroy what they could not understand. She found Luthien in his private study, standing before the great window that overlooked the valley below. The moon hung low in the sky, casting silver light across his pale features. He had cleaned away all evidence of the battle, though she could still sense the lingering energy of supernatural violence in the air. "The servants are disposing of the bodies," he said without turning around. "By morning, there will be no trace of what happened here. The forest will claim them, as it has claimed so many others over the centuries." Ava walked to stand beside him, following his gaze down to the village lights that twinkled in the distance like fallen stars. Millbrook looked so small from this height, so insignificant. "They'll send others," she said quietly. "When these men don't return, they'll know what happened." "Perhaps," Luthien's voice was thoughtful, "but I doubt anyone else will be brave enough or foolish enough to face me again. Word will spread, the legend will grow, and fear will keep them away, as it has for centuries." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sleeping village that had cast them both out in different ways. Finally, Luthien turned to face her, his crimson eyes serious. "There is something we must discuss, something I have been putting off for too long." I felt my heart skip a beat.
Ava had been expecting this conversation, had been dreading and anticipating it in equal measure. "You're offering to turn me?" "I am offering you a choice," Luthien corrected. "The same choice I was given 400 years ago. You can remain as you are, human, mortal, beautiful for a brief span of years before age claims you, or you can become something more, something eternal." The weight of the decision settled over her like a shroud. This was not a choice to be made lightly. Once transformed, there would be no going back, no changing her mind, no returning to the simple human life she had once known. "Tell me what it would mean," she said. "All of it, the good and the terrible." Luthien moved closer, his cold fingers tracing the line of her jaw with infinite gentleness. "You would become like me, immortal, powerful, no longer bound by human weakness. You would never age, never sicken, never die. Your gifts, your healing abilities, your connection to the natural world would be magnified 1,000-fold. And the cost? You would need to feed on human blood to survive. You would be forever changed, no longer entirely human. The sunlight would burn your skin, and you would be bound to the darkness." His voice grew softer. "And you would be tied to me for all eternity. There would be no leaving, no changing your mind. We would be bonded in ways that transcend human understanding. Ava considered this, weighing immortality against mortality, power against humanity. In the distance, she could see the first pale hint of dawn beginning to touch the eastern sky. If I chose to remain human, she asked, what would happen to us? I would treasure every moment we had together, Lucian said honestly. I would protect you, care for you, love you for as long as your mortal life allowed. And when death finally claimed you, I would mourn you for the rest of my eternal existence. The thought of leaving him alone with that kind of grief was unbearable. More than that, the thought of leaving him at all had become unthinkable. This castle was her home. Now, he was her home. I have one question, she said, looking up into his ancient eyes. Do you love me? Not because you remind me of her, not because I'm useful to you, but me, Ava, exactly as I am. Lucian's expression softened in a way she had never seen before. I love you more than I loved my mortal life, more than I loved the man I used to be. You are not her, Ava. You are something far more precious. You are yourself, unique and irreplaceable. And yes, I love you completely, eternally. That was all she needed to hear. Then I choose you, she whispered. I choose this life, this castle, this eternity. I choose you, Lucian. Relief and joy flashed across his features like lightning, illuminating a midnight sky. Are you certain? Once it is done. I'm certain, she interrupted, reaching up to touch his face. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The transformation was unlike anything she could have imagined. Lucian's bite was gentle, almost loving, and as her mortal blood flowed away, she felt an indescribable sense of completion. Power flooded through her veins like liquid starlight, remaking her from the inside out. When it was over, she was no longer merely human. She was something magnificent and terrible and eternal. As the first rays of dawn began to creak across the sky, they stood together on the great balcony of the eastern tower. Storm clouds gathered to shield them from the killing light, as if nature itself approved of their union. Ava looked out over the valley with new eyes, vampire eyes that could see for miles, that could pierce the veil between life and death. She felt Lucian's presence beside her like a second heartbeat, their bond now deeper than blood, stronger than time itself. They cast you out, but I claimed you. From this night on, you are mine, and I am yours forever. Ava smiled, feeling the sharp points of her new fangs against her lips. Forever, she agreed. And for the first time in her life, forever didn't seem nearly long enough. In the village below, the people of Millbrook would awake to find their crusading heroes had never returned. They would whisper fearful prayers and avoid looking toward the castle on the mountain. And in time, they would forget about the girl they had cast out, never knowing that she had found something far more valuable than their acceptance. She had found love, she had found power, she had found her true self, and she would have eternity to enjoy them.